Hello guys, welcome back. In this video, let's talk about layout, how to layout our web application using CSS grid, you understand? And CSS grid layout. A grid layout model offer a grid-based layout system with rows and columns. Basically, this has a grid layout structure of our web application, like a collection of a row and a column, you understand? And the grid layout allow developer to easily create a complex web layout. For example, now if you want to create a complex web pages, you can use a grid layout to structure your web application. A grid layout makes it easier to design a responsive layout structure without using float. In this example now, in this what I did here now, I'm not using float here. I just make use of a grid layout to structure what I'm doing here, and this is the coding aspect of what I'm doing in this project, you understand? And a grid basically use row and column, you understand? That is what grid use, row and column formats, you understand? It divides your script into a row and column format. Let's talk about a grid container. What is a grid container? A grid container houses all grid items. For example, now this is a grid item, this is a grid item 1, and this is a grid item 2. You understand? The grid container houses all the grid items. You understand? That is what we refer to as a grid container. And inside, when using grid, the display, when you're writing a CSS file, the display, your display here will be grid. Your first style here will be grid. If you look at that, the container, the display of the container is grid. You understand? That's how you use a grid. And to talk about the grid template column to run FR, it all depends on what you want to set your grid this thing to, understand? And I want to talk about in a grid versus flex pause. A CSS grid is used for two-dimensional layouts with rows and columns. That is one of the most important part of using CSS grid is two-dimensional row and column. And CSS flex pause is used for one-dimensional layout with row. Understand? It's used either one. Flex is 1, while grid is 2. You understand? It's very difficult to choose which one you want to use. Sorry, but for me, I'm going for a grid layout, because it's very easy to structure our web application using a grid layout. And in our next video, we are going to create a full website using a grid, or we're going to make something like this using a grid layout. That is very simple. Please subscribe to my channel, watch and subscribe and share to your friends. One love, thank you.